It's crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On Steelers meets Locked On Browns. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers here with Spencer German of Locked On Browns, and we're here getting you ready for Steelers Browns this Sunday, 1 p.m. in Pittsburgh. As always, Crossover Thursday is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Spencer, there's a lot of talk right now about quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers being new in Pittsburgh. That's kind of still people still adjusting to what that means. But man, when we talk about quarterback shakeups, Cleveland has taken that to the nth degree in this season. Dillon Gabriel getting his first start against the Vikings last week, and then trading away Joe Flacco. It's so crazy because, in Pittsburgh, as a writer, I was so looking forward to the Kenny Pickett game where he was going to get to lead the Browns against the Steelers. That never even comes to fruition. He's somewhere completely else. What's been your read as far as how Dillon Gabriel handled his first game and how he's looking heading into this week?
It's interesting you bring up the Kenny Pickett thing. What's funny about that is kind of looking back on this, I almost feel like the Browns really wanted Pickett to be the guy who emerged at the end of training camp as the starter for them. And that Flacco was kind of like the, break glass in case of emergency option. And they ended up kind of having to break the glass because of emergency when Kenny Pickett went down week 1 of training camp with the hamstring issue that basically kept him from getting meaningful reps until basically the last week of the preseason. By then they needed a decision to be made. So it's kind of funny you say that because I think a lot of people felt that could have been how this season started, and it wasn't. And it's gone so poorly since then that, 4 weeks in, they're making a quarterback change to Dillon Gabriel. He makes his first start last week. Now this week they trade Joe Flacco, who was now their backup and was still a captain on this team and brought a sense of leadership that they appreciated. But I can say this, like, it's interesting too, because Stefanski told us on Wednesday that even he was basically caught off guard by this. Like, they were not expecting to move Joe Flacco. That wasn't really in the plan. And then the Bengals called up because they were so desperate and said, hey, here's what we'll give you. Like, let's make this thing happen. They really wanted Joe. And so they got it done. And so, yeah, that basically makes it like where Dillon Gabriel is sort of center stage here in Cleveland. And it's now all eyes on him for the rest of the season to see what he can do and if he can be a quality starter for this team, with Shedeur sort of lurking in the background and people ready to see him at some point as well. And, I think his first game, I called it solid. I also said I thought it was intriguing enough that Browns fans should want more and should be excited to see more from him. But it all kind of centers around how much more Kevin Stefanski is willing to give him in this offense. And I don't know that that's going to be I think the conservative game plan you saw in week 1, or sorry, not week 1, but in his first start is going to be similar to what you see here against the Steelers, because that Steelers defense is obviously very, very good. And I don't think Kevin wants to put Dillon in a spot going to Pittsburgh where this team hasn't won since 2003 in the regular season to, make any big mistakes or really, mess up an opportunity for the Browns offense. So I think they're going to probably play it pretty safe. But I do think there is some intrigue into what Dillon kind of continues to do after getting this first start under his belt.
Certainly. I think that's definitely a big part of it. Against the Vikings, he went 19 of 33 for 190 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Protecting the football was definitely a priority. Took 2 sacks. But, I looked at it and, look, there weren't a lot of hey, young buck, show us the big arm, throwing deep down the field into, splitting the cover 2. Was a lot more like, hey, take the smart reads here. We're trying to set you up, because the Vikings themselves are an aggressive defense. The Steelers just saw that the week before. And so I think it's interesting to see that. What's the temperament around Shedeur Sanders too? And I know Locked On Steelers fans are like, Chris, get to the Steelers. But Shedeur Sanders was a guy that Mike Tomlin praised a lot going into the draft class. As I told people on the show, that was a smokescreen. But last week you had him like pantomiming answers or whatever, like mouthing out answers. And, with the Dillon Gabriel starter announcement how has he been since? Have you guys talked to him? I know you were in that scrum where he wasn't really talking, but moving his mouth.
Yeah, so I think it's important for people to recognize like what that was all about. Because even in the moment, I think we were all kind of caught off guard, like, oh, okay, like this is
Right.
how he's handling this. And I think it was easy to sort of equate it back to, oh, this is how he's handling answering questions about the quarterback change. Instead, I think we all came to realize pretty quickly after that he was basically doing that in response to it started, I think, from Rex Ryan's comments last week on ESPN. I think it also extended to others who of him this season and made comments about why is this guy even talking? Why is he even being given the platform? The Browns aren't handling this, like all these different things. I think that was basically his way of saying, listen, people think I'm talking too much, so I'm just not going to talk. Now, he could have just told us he wasn't going to talk, obviously. But right. I do think like that was one of the reasons why I understand where people are coming from when they saw that. And like, I can understand where he's coming from with making that his response to some of the criticism out there, but I can also understand where people probably saw that and said, this is why he fell in the draft and why teams maybe weren't interested in him because they think that there's just this extra sideshow that goes into all this. From my perspective, I think it was fine that we were talking to a third string quarterback who's also a rookie in this class,
exactly,
who, with the other quarterback that was basically getting the starting job at this point. And that everybody, I think, consensusly understands, like, probably is more talented than where he was drafted. And so, yeah, like, there's an interesting story there to me, which is why I was even part of that scrum in the first place. But yeah, like, I think Shedeur is really talented. And I think the Browns right now are sort of reserved in putting him out there. Kevin Stefanski on Wednesday and talking about who's going to be the backup quarterback now. Not really committal to the Shedeur Sanders. On the unofficial depth chart, it's Shedeur Sanders. But he said he had to sort of wait till the week plays out. There's Bailey Zappi on the practice squad who they could elevate and then to the active roster and then make the backup quarterback. So they have some options there. But it really doesn't sound like it's one of those situations where it was less about what Kevin Stefanski did say and more about what he didn't say. And the fact that he wasn't willing to say, yeah, Shedeur's our backup, I think speaks to where they think he's at and how they're trying to, prioritize his development, and that maybe in that process, they don't think he's quite ready yet. So I do think he plays at some point this season, but as far as like, will he be on the field this weekend? I don't know that he's even going to be the guy who's a play away from starting or from playing. So it's an interesting dynamic there. Everyone's really chomping at the bit to see him, but I don't know. I think it's still going to be a while yet till we do. I'm definitely interested from your perspective, Chris, because we know one of the most, as we talk about quarterbacks, like one of the most polarizing quarterback situations this entire year was Aaron Rodgers, how long it took him to finally sign, and now that he's finally in the building. I think the Steelers offense has had a little bit of juice to it with Aaron Rodgers under center, but also, he's still an older quarterback, and he's not quite the same player that he used to be. So what are the early returns from your perspective on Aaron Rodgers?
Aaron Rodgers, as a guy, when the Steelers were even flirting with him, I could tell you Steelers fans were up in my mentions being like, no, get this guy. And even I was thinking, like, I don't know, man, all the sideshow stuff, the Pat McAfee show, the comments, and then, he go on, Joe Rogan and make comments about vaccines and all those types of things. It brought serious questions. And it was like, man, is he going to bring that here? You saw him, kind of dismissing Robert Saleh on the sideline when he was with the Jets. And there was a lot of questions, man, is he going to want to run the show? Is he going to come in and say, all right, now you got to go get Randall Cobb, Alan Lazard, call up Jordy Nelson, see if he's doing anything. But none of that has transpired for the Steelers. He's come in, he's been a leader, but he's been that sort of leader that doesn't assume that he runs everything. He says, hey, I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure the offense is working, but he's not trying to overstep the leadership of guys like Cam Heyward, TJ Watt, guys that have been around the Steelers. And he hasn't made any Pat McAfee show appearances. He hasn't said anything that controversial. And so that's, I think, has been welcome for the Steelers. And then he's been efficient. The Steelers have the 8th best red zone offense, and a lot of it is because Aaron Rodgers has made good decisions in the red zone. And so I look at that and I think, man, this is a chance for the Steelers to finally get some coherent quarterback play with the way that he's playing right now, because I think that's where that's where the Steelers have been lacking, is that they haven't had just consistent, coherent quarterback play from anyone. And right now, Aaron Rodgers, he's averaging 2 touchdown passes a game. So the Steelers, they haven't had, efficiency there, whether it's been Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, Duck Hodges. It's been a minute since the days of Ben Roethlisberger, and not even old man Ben Roethlisberger. So I think that's been present there. I just think, Spencer, it's going to be really interesting for how Kevin Stefanski wants to protect his quarterback, because everyone knows Mike Tomlin and the Steelers and his time playing with the Steelers, they are 26-6 when they face rookie quarterbacks. So Dillon Gabriel going in there, and if Shedeur Sanders has to go in there, I think we're going to talk about the pass rush next, but I think that's going to be a big part of this. Is Kevin Stefanski needs to find ways to protect Dillon Gabriel from getting into the trouble the Steelers try to scheme up with their defense.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. Dillon Gabriel protecting the football. I think honestly, of all the things that went right for Dillon Gabriel last week, I think that's the number one most important thing to Kevin Stefanski. And I think that was seen in how he called that game for Dillon Gabriel, the play calls they were sort of executing, what he was asking him to do in the offense. They were heavily relying on the run game, which I think is also going to be a factor this weekend in Pittsburgh. So yeah, I think that conservative approach is going to be similar to what we see, because I think the most important thing to Kevin Stefanski, and he knows his offense right now is a mess. Haven't scored. They've gone 10 straight games without scoring 20 or more points. That's like the third longest streak, tied for the third longest streak since 2000 for teams that haven't been able to accomplish that feat. So they're sort of on uncharted territory here. But I think he understands, like, because of how bad the offense is, we cannot afford to turn the football over. And so I have to make sure that Dillon's making the right choices, being smart with the football. So I think that was a positive from last week. I think it would also be a positive if they can do that against Pittsburgh. But I also think you're going to have to score more than they have to this point to try to beat the Steelers team. And I know we'll see. We'll talk about how the defense is kind of coming to play in this one, obviously coming up.
That's coming up next here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On Steelers meets Locked On Browns. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else. You can feel Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like the players, that they sweat through every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Back here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, Spencer German, Locked On Steelers, Locked On Browns. Spencer, let's talk about the pass rush in this game, which it is the top thing to talk about when these two teams play together, as it has been since 2017 when both teams added who. The Browns drafted Myles Garrett first overall. The Steelers went and got TJ Watt 30th overall, and the two have been just head-to-head competing as the two best edge rushers in football for the past, 8 years? It's kind of wild that it's been this long, 9 years, however long it's been. But right now, both guys, I think, Myles Garrett came out on fire. TJ Watt came out a little bit slow. I think it was less TJ Watt. Teams were triple teaming him. The Steelers were trying to key up how to get him more isolated looks. But now he has been doing that. Both guys up there as far as sack production this year. What have you seen from how the Browns have approached their pass rush this year? Because we know Jim Schwartz, he's an aggressive guy, but right now, if you look at the advanced numbers from both teams, the Steelers are blitzing like the fourth most of any team in the NFL. The Browns not blitzing as much, but of course, still getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say this. I think just from the guys up front, the four guys that are down in the trenches for the Browns, if you take blitzing out of it, I think the Browns have the best defensive line in football. And listen, somebody could push back on that. I understand people might hear that, especially in Pittsburgh, and laugh and say, it's the Browns. Look at their record. How can you say it? No, this defensive line is legit. And I think that's the biggest difference this year is, listen, Myles is Myles. He's going to get his. He's a tremendous player. He's a future Hall of Famer. You might as well start in the gold jacket for him. We know he's going to the Hall of Fame. And the rivalry that exists between him and TJ, it's a fun sort of narrative that always comes up between these two teams, especially when you consider this offseason, they both got paid and TJ made sure to just get $1 million more than Myles. Right. Exactly. So that definitely exists. And it's definitely sort of a fun storyline here. But I think for the Steelers, this is more so about how are they going to handle everybody else? Because again, Myles is going to make his plays because he always does. Even when you chip him, you do everything. But we know the Steelers are going to throw a lot Myles Garrett's way. My question is, and that's been, I think, what's played out these first 5 weeks, what's going to happen when you throw 2 or 3 guys Myles' way with the other guys up that you're trying to block? Because the rotation of Isaiah McGuire and Alex Wright has been fantastic opposite of Myles Garrett at defensive end. Those 2 guys both forced fumbles last week, and the Browns recovered them in that game in London. Up in the middle, you add Mason Graham via the draft. There's some numbers that suggest like he hasn't been quite as dominant, but I still think like the base is there that he is stopping the run plays. He is generally pushing the pocket a lot, and he is making his presence felt in a number of different spots. And I think the biggest one is Malik Collins. I was surprised, like maybe not surprised because I understand like the Browns were in a certain situation this offseason where nobody was really caring about what they were doing other than the quarterback position. But the Malik Collins signing to me was one of the most underrated signings that went down this entire offseason. Dude was top 10 in pass rush win rate from the interior last season. Like he's a good player. And what's beautiful about this group is because Myles draws so much attention, it frees up everybody else to make plays. And they finally have guys supporting Myles who can make those plays. So yeah, like I agree with you. It's the focus is always going to be on Myles. He's a game wrecker. He can screw up any team's game plan. But I'm curious to see how the Steelers up front handle the rest of that group because this group absolutely can screw up whatever plans the Steelers have on offense single-handedly and keep this game close because of it.
The Steelers recognize that, and while this guy's been a starter for a couple years, this is his first year starting at left tackle. That's Steelers starting left tackle Broderick Jones, a 2023 first-round pick. We got a chance to ask him about Myles Garrett. Here's how he reacted when he got asked about Myles Garrett and how he has to prepare against one of the best edge rushers in football.
What doesn't settle? It's the question. He's just an amazing player all around. Plays the run, plays the pass. He's just a freak of nature. So, you got to do everything you can to slow him down. Just try and keep a lid on him. I guess that's the right way to say it. So, that's the game plan, and hopefully we can stick to it and execute.
So Broderick Jones talking about sticking to the game plan here, but one thing the Steelers added to their game plan last week against another 4-man front with the Vikings, or well, I guess 2 weeks ago now. But what they did against them was they got their tight ends to work. And if you're familiar with the Steelers tight ends, if you're not paying attention every week, they actually got Darnell Washington the most snaps of any skill player on the team, even more than DK Metcalf, because he was being used for wham blocks. He was being used to help set the edge in the run game. He was being used as extra pass protection and also to catch passes. And so I fully anticipate the Steelers to throw extra help Broderick Jones's way for his first game playing left tackle against Myles Garrett and not just leave him on an island and trust that they're going to be able to get help elsewhere. Plus, the Steelers also, they've been throwing in their swing tackle, Spencer Anderson. Last week, he was on the field quite a bit, or 2 weeks ago again against the Vikings. So I expect some Spencer Anderson to come over there to help against Myles Garrett. I expect Darnell Washington to come over there and help against Myles Garrett. I also expect guys like Pat Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, or even like a receiver like DK Metcalf or Ben Skoranek to kind of help with like a chip that can help him, like, hey, let's knock him in the direction that we plan to kind of catch him on this play. Because the Steelers are well familiar with him, and they've been going against him since 2017. And, it's the same thing for the Browns. They know what TJ Watt brings. And I think that's what's going to be interesting in this game because both of these teams are right up there when it comes to pass rush production and in a sack percentage per drop back. The Browns have the 4th highest rate in the NFL. The Steelers have the 2nd highest rate in total sacks per game rate right now. The Browns have the 7th highest in the NFL. The Steelers have the 2nd highest in the NFL. So you're looking at these teams in that they pride themselves on getting after the quarterback. And albeit the Steelers are doing it differently this year. I think traditionally under TJ Watt for many years, especially with Terrell Austin as their defensive coordinator, especially the last 3 years, they didn't blitz. They kind of did what the Browns did. They relied on their front four because they said, hey, we're just going to beat you with these guys. But this year, the Steelers are blitzing at over 35% of the time. That's the 4th highest rate in the league. And part of that was, in my opinion, because teams were just triple teaming TJ Watt every play. And they're just like, you know what? we got to cause more havoc. We can't just rely on 4 guys to just win all the time. And with new guys like rookie Derek Harmon playing defensive tackle next to Cam Heyward, Nick Herbig's been playing more in the rotation with Alex Highsmith, who's expected to be back this week from his injury. I think it's going to be an interesting chess match as far as how the Steelers try to send blitzes that try to catch the rookie off guard versus the Browns trying to find ways that they can beat a young Steelers offensive line and take an old Aaron Rodgers and put him in a disadvantageous situation.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I will go back real quick to the Broderick Jones comments because they kind of reminded me of the joint practices with the Eagles that the Browns had this summer, where Jordan Mailata, after practice the one day, he was getting absolutely schooled by Myles. And a lot of it's joint practices, so a lot of the stuff they were doing, like they just left him on an island. They didn't do what you would actually do in a game.
Right.
But he basically said, like, listen, I did my job and Myles still beat me. Like that, and that kind of sums up Myles Garrett in a nutshell, right? Like he's the type of player that you could do everything right and it just won't matter because he's a freak. He's a freak in nature. And so I anticipate, like you said, that the Steelers will throw a lot his way. My question becomes, like I said, like, can the other guys kind of get home after that? And I do think, to your point, like, I know it's so cliche to say that, so much about football or winning a football game comes down to what happens in the trenches. But I do think, like, the defensive lines almost will tell the story of this game. And I do think it's interesting that, like, you have 2 different dynamics at quarterbacks between these 2 teams. One with the Browns, who are starting a rookie who hasn't seen a lot, doesn't have that experience. The other in Aaron Rodgers, who has seen a lot, but not quite as mobile as he used to be, maybe lost a little bit of a step in his game. So there's sort of some different dynamics there where it's like, well, hey, one guy's going up against a pass rush and has to try to like track the clock. And the other guy has to go up against this blitzing Steelers team and, diagnose things that he probably hasn't seen before. So which strategy kind of comes out victorious in a way. So I think that is a fascinating way to look at it. I will say this, in like the TJ Watt, Myles Garrett thing, I feel like every time they play in Pittsburgh, TJ has an absolutely ridiculous game, makes some, Herculean pick 6 type play all by himself, or like strip sack that leads to a touchdown. And I feel like Myles kind of disappears in these games. And then when it's flipped and it's in Cleveland, Myles does his thing and TJ maybe, doesn't do quite as well. So I know like there's certainly a lot of debate around TJ right now, and people were bringing up numbers at the end of last season about how he kind of fell off a cliff at the end of the season and whatnot. I still think TJ Watt's one of the best players in football. He's obviously one of the best pass rushers in football. And I think, like Myles, he draws so much attention. You brought it up. Like, I think guys like Herbig, I think, Highsmith, who's coming back this week, I think those guys become infinitely more important as well when TJ is going to draw a lot of attention. But I'm just kind of going into it assuming TJ is going to make some miraculous play because he always seems to do that against the Browns in Pittsburgh.
He certainly does. TJ Watt known for getting after teams in general, but especially is known for getting after the Cleveland Browns. I mean, it's a long history.
I'll say this too: the Browns' offensive line. Now they got Jack Conklin back last week, and I think that helped things. But their offensive line has been a mess through these first 5 weeks for the most part. Like a lot of miscommunications, a lot of guys just kind of getting through. And I think that's another part of this conversation because, like you said, the Steelers are going to blitz a lot. They're one of the top blitzing teams in football right now. If they're going to blitz a lot, like making sure guys are on the same page about who you're picking up and not missing assignments and knowing like, okay, this guy's coming in this gap, I got him. This guy's faking like he's blitzing, a simulated blitz, and then dropping back. They got to sort of be on their P's and Q's with those things. And I don't know that I trust this group to do that. So just quite yet. So it's going to be interesting because I thought that will all play into the decision-making from Dillon Gabriel. And if they can rattle this rookie quarterback, I think for sure it's a recipe for the Steelers to win this game.
Certainly can be. As it stands right now, Myles Garrett has 4 sacks in 5 games, a rate of 0.8 sacks per game. TJ Watt, 3 sacks in 4 games, a rate of 0.75 sacks per game. Both still getting after it, and even while both drawing double, triple, and sometimes even quadruple teams with double chips, it's insane what teams go through to stop both of these guys. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the state of this rivalry because Aaron Rodgers had some interesting comments. This will be his first foray into AFC North football, and there's some interesting tidbits to look at from what he said to where the Browns stand with Kevin Stefanski this year. We'll explore all of that next here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, Spencer German. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, what reminds you this show is brought to you by Game Time. The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. That's why I use Game Time. It's the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. I pulled up Game Time in just a couple taps. I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite NFL games as low as $100. I love zone deals too because you pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. It's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. We're also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is well underway, and the FanDuel is making sure that you can be ready for all the action with this can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 on FanDuel, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, player props, building same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet for your chance to get $300 in bonus bets only on FanDuel. We're back here on Crossover Thursday. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, Spencer German of Locked On Browns. Spencer, I'm going to read out a response to a question that Aaron Rodgers gave on Wednesday in the locker room. I was there for this, and he was asked about AFC North rivalries in the league. And of course, Aaron Rodgers knows plenty about rivalries with the NFC North, which is a classic division. But here's what he said. He said, I was asking Patrick Queen about it the other day because he's been on both sides, playing with the Ravens and now with the Steelers. In my own time in the North and the NFC, I think there's always been a great rivalry with Chicago and Minnesota. The states kind of don't like each other, so there was more bad blood between the fans. Detroit, there wasn't the same type of energy. We wanted to beat them, but there wasn't like the hatred that Wisconsin people have for Minnesota. So just old school rivalry there. It seems like that it's like that with this, that kind of rivalry is with the Browns, and the hatred goes both ways between the Steelers and the Bengals and the Steelers and the Ravens. Basically kind of saying that of the three AFC, the hatred, it's up here with the Ravens, it's up here with the Bengals, but it's more here with the Browns. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, that's just his perspective. And Patrick Queen himself just became a Steeler last year. I think part of it is just the history of the animosity. The Ravens and the Steelers have both top dogs. The Bengals were always that team that kind of just hurt the Steelers right before the playoffs with injuries and got into the playoffs a little bit. But it's only been recently that the Browns have started to bite back at the Steelers. They beat them in the playoffs, and the Steelers haven't won in Cleveland since 2021. But I do think there's a different temperament there. What's your read on, one, that comment, but also this rivalry?
Yeah, I love this conversation because I think people are going to be mad, but I think Aaron Rodgers is kind of right in that it is kind of one-sided. Listen, living in Cleveland, talking to fans, all that, like, I get how it goes. You know, I also grew up in Pennsylvania for several years, so I know how Steelers fans are and how they sort of see this. I think a lot, like, to your point, I think the rivalry the Steelers have with the Bengals and the Ravens kind of extends from, listen, the early 2000s when those teams would face off in playoffs, and there was a lot of hard hitting, and like the Vontaze Burfict hit on Antonio Brown, and the hit on Carson Palmer that knocks the Bengals, that ruins the Bengals postseason early in the early 2000s. Like, there's so many different stories there. The Browns and Steelers, like, they just don't have those things, right? There's the 1 year in 2020. And so I do think this is like a big brother, little brother type thing where Browns fans have hated being basically just beaten up on by the Steelers all these years. And so they want that revenge, and they're ready to sort of, you know, punch back at big brother who's bullied them all their lives. But the Steelers don't really see them as much of a threat at this point still, because they still haven't gotten their you-know-what together. So I've always kind of argued, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this because I don't want Browns fans to be mad, but I've always kind of argued that I think the Ravens should be the team that Browns fans hate the most, simply because they
stole
stole
their
your
team.
That
Right.
that is the original Browns, right? Like that's the original Browns. I mean, and I get it from a geographic standpoint. Like Pittsburgh and Cleveland are only like 2 hours apart. It's super close. I also think they're all, like, the other part of this too is when the Browns were gone, I know for a fact there's a lot of people in Ohio, Northeast Ohio especially, who gravitated towards the Steelers during those couple years because they were good and the Browns weren't. And even in the early 2000s when the Browns came back, but they were bad, I think a lot of people sort of stuck with that. And so there's a lot of people in Cleveland, young people in Cleveland, who grew up Steelers fans because their parents are like, well, hey, I'm going to go gravitate towards this team because we don't have a team anymore. So I think that plays a role into too. But yeah, listen, I think what Aaron Rodgers said is probably fair in terms of his assessment, even though he's kind of new to this situation. That doesn't mean it, like, if the Browns won this game on Sunday, it would mean a lot to the fan base. Like anytime they beat the Steelers, it's a party. Like they love that. And I understand why. So I'm not begrudging fans not to get excited if that happens. But I do think there is like that big brother, little brother sort of thing going on here where I get where the Steelers look at the Bengals and Ravens as bigger rivals and the Browns are just kind of there. But the Browns, it's always about chasing Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it honestly is. I think that's the thing here is that, like, again, like that playoff win in the 2020-2021 season, it was like the first time the Browns could really stick it to the Steelers and be like, ha, we ruined your year. And like, Ben Roethlisberger, like, crying on the bench. But even with that, like the next year he comes back as old man Ben and he sweeps the Browns when that was supposed to be their year with Baker Mayfield. Everything was supposed to happen. So like it's the Browns just haven't had their chance to kind of plant their flag. And I think that's part of it. And also the history, and I want to get your perspective on this, the history that the Browns have of oftentimes, and sometimes this just happens because they often play the Steelers at the end of the season, but they often fire their coaches after they lose to the Steelers historically. And I don't think it's going to happen this week. Kevin Stefanski, a two-time coach of the year, has a respect there, but the Browns, we all knew this was going to be a rebuilding year for them. I think a lot of people picked them to finish last in the division, but they're 1-4, and there's a lot of struggles and there's frustrations and things like that. What is the temperament around Kevin Stefanski right now when it comes to the Browns and how things have been handled and, going into this game?
Yeah, listen, Hugh Jackson was fired. He was the last coach that was fired after losing to the Steelers back in, I guess it would have been 2018. And then Freddie Kitchens ends up taking over the next year, and he only gets the 1 year, and then that paves the way for Kevin Stefanski to get hired in 2020. And you're right, like I've talked a lot on my podcast about how I think in general Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, you could call it a pass, I guess. I think they're kind of getting a mulligan for the Deshaun thing. Like I think they'll be back next year because I think Jimmy Haslam wants to give them a chance to sort of fix this thing and get it right after the Deshaun thing. But it also can't be ignored that, especially after last week, Kevin Stefanski came under a lot of fire in that game in London for how he sort of managed things and in the offense, 10 straight games that I alluded to earlier without scoring 20 points. And he is supposed to be this great offensive coach, right? I mean, the guy that he was going against, Kevin O'Connell, had Carson Wentz and 3/5 of his offensive line gone, and he found a way to win a game. And Kevin Stefanski just can't seem to do that. I get that the talent isn't there, but at some point, like, you run out of excuses. You run out of places to blame. You are what your record says you are. You are what your offense says you are if you're Kevin Stefanski. So, again, I'm not saying he's going to get fired after this week. I think that would be wildly irresponsible for me to say. But I can't act like this isn't a pretty important game in terms of, like, his continued assessment as the season goes on. Like, if he's going to get fired, it probably won't be till the end of the year. But I do think, like, going to Pittsburgh, and if this game gets ugly, especially as this Joe Flacco trade seemed to catch everybody off guard, there was kind of a malaise in the locker room on Wednesday. Like, it seemed, I don't know if that's like jet lag from London. Like, I don't know what it is. But if they go into Pittsburgh and they get absolutely steamrolled, and the offense continues to struggle as you turn to Dillon Gabriel for another game, and you're kind of pivoting to let's see what these rookies have at quarterback, like, it's going to get louder and louder and louder. Like, it'll be another sort of notch in the belt for, is this the right guy for this team moving forward? And I think it will start to tell more of that story. So, again, I don't think he's getting fired, but I do think this is another important game for Stefanski if he's going to sort of salvage this season. And even though I think he's back next year, things can change over, 12 weeks that remain on this schedule. And if it gets really bad, or if it gets bad to worse, then like I think there would be a conversation there by the time you get to the end of the season. That starts on Sunday with Pittsburgh.
Absolutely. Spencer, thank you so much for joining me here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Please let people know where they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, man. At Spencito _ on the handle there. Obviously, Locked On Browns, where you can find it wherever you get your podcasts, and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. It's always a pleasure, Chris. I know we'll do this again later this season. I'll try to let you talk a little bit more on that one because I feel like I talked a little bit too much today. So,
oh no, trust me, I talk way too much sometimes. Anyways, I'm Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. Thank you, Spencer, for joining me here. Thank you all for joining us here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can find me on all your social media apps at Carter Critiques, whether it's on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, same handle everywhere at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. And you can find me here, just like you find Spencer, on your Locked On Podcast Network, on your favorite podcasting apps, and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Locked On Browns episodes or all of your Locked On Steelers episodes, however you found it. Be sure to tune in tomorrow as both give our predictions for the game and final looks heading into Steelers-Browns on Sunday here on the Locked On Podcast Network.